Bom, bom dia ou boa tarde, né, a todos, todas e todes. Estamos iniciando o terceiro dia de atividades do quarto SInPeM e eu estava ouvindo a tradução, deixa eu desligar aqui, me desculpem. Eu sou Maria Isabel Landim, professora do Museu de Zoologia da Universidade de São Paulo, e estou na vice-coordenação do programa Interunidades em Museologia da USP, que organiza este evento, né? Eu vou fazer uma breve descrição do que vocês podem ver na minha tela. Eu sou uma senhora de meia idade, tenho ascendentes europeus, africanos e ameríndios, então isso traduz numa fisionomia que eu diria com um tom de pele meio descolorido, meus cabelos prateados, e eu estou com uma camisa azul, portando óculos meio esverdeados, né? E apareço numa parede de fundo branco, né, com um relógio antigo pendurado, tá? Eu gostaria de começar, né, aqui as nossas atividades, reforçando os agradecimentos, né, a todos os organizadores, né, alunos, servidores, docentes do programa do PPGMUS da USP e de outros programas que colaboraram, né, para tornar esse evento possível, né, e especialmente para as pessoas que estão aqui hoje colaborando para a realização desta conferência, né? Então, nós temos alunos e egressos, a gente está com a Bárbara e com a Paula, né? A gente tem os servidores do MAI, o Kleberson e o Murilo, fundamentais para a realização desse evento que depende tanto dessas tecnologias, e eles têm sido tão eficientes, né, em prover todas essas necessidades para a gente. Queria agradecer aos tradutores de Libras, né? A gente está com a Fernanda e com a Andréia, e também ao Sérgio, que está trabalhando aqui, fazendo a tradução dessa palestra, que será proferida originalmente em inglês. Tá? Essa conferência, eu fico feliz porque ela foi fortemente beneficiada, né, pela pandemia. Algumas boas notícias a gente tem que celebrar, porque a doutora Ina havia sido convidada para participar do SInPeM no modelo presencial, e na época ela declinou do convite, porque ela falou que já tinha compromissos, e isso dependia de fazer uma viagem longuíssima, né, em curto espaço de tempo. Então, graças a esse novo formato, né, que a gente assumiu remoto, a gente pode contar, então, com a participação da doutora Ina, a quem eu agradeço muitíssimo por estar hoje aqui conosco, né? A doutora Ina, ela organiza o Departamento Humanidades da Natureza no Museu de História Natural de Berlim, em colaboração com Anita Hermann-Steder e Tahani Nadim. Tá? Ela é historiadora da ciência, escreveu sobre história da ciência popular, e o foco atual dela está voltado para as questões de política da natureza, história natural e colonialismo, história contemporânea do museu, né, e história do extrativismo, translocação e apropriação de espécimes de história natural. Então, eu acho que ela vai compartilhar com a gente uma experiência dentro de um grande museu de história natural que certamente vai ensejar muitas das nossas reflexões. Eu desejo a todos um ótimo dia de evento e passo a palavra com meus agradecimentos à doutora Ina.
Yes, thank you so much for the kind introduction. It's really wonderful to be here. Let me just check out my screen. I can't delete my own picture. Is there any chance that I'm not seeing myself all the time? Because I don't like that. Barbara, do you have any tricks?
The view button in the
I can't.
up corner.
I can't not see myself on the screen. If it's not an easy, because no problem. I just start because we have 50 minutes time, and let me say thank you. I'm so happy to be here today. Thank you, Isabel, for inviting me twice, and that's really something from the pandemic that is great. I can be with you and you can be with me, although there are 5,000 kilometers between us, and I'm happy to really join your conference. What I would like to do today, let me shortly share my screen, is to answer or to pose the question why every natural history museum should have a Center for Arts and Humanities. Before I start, I was asked to briefly describe myself, and I'm really happy to do so because it also shows the position from which I'm talking to you. And of course, my positionality in the context of my work. My name is Ina. I'm a white female historian of science, as Isabel already mentioned. Since 2012, I'm working in the Berlin Natural History Museum, where I established the Department Humanities of Nature. What you see here around me is my home office, where I'm in all day long and since 1.5 years, as all of you. And I have to say, I'm really happy to have this space of my own. Although my children are around, and if they join us, please bear with me, be patient, and they don't really get why I speak to my computer all day long. So that's what else can I see? Behind me is a white curtain. I won't tell you what is behind it, and I'm dressed in black. So today I would like to talk about the Humanities of Nature department, and as a start I would like to briefly introduce the context I'm working in. So what comes next is a short history of the Museum für Naturkunde. The Berlin Museum was founded in 1810 as part of the newly established Berlin University, which was put up or established in the former castle. You see it here on the screen. It's still the Humboldt University in Berlin's center. In its first decades, the collections were stored in the university building and occupied more and more rooms of the building. This caused quite a conflict and scandals, and when an enormous walrus was dissected in front of the university's auditorium, it was decided that the natural history collections had to move somewhere else. A new building was finally opened in 1889. And it is until now located in this very building, which is located in Invalidenstraße, where it holds more than 30 million objects from all around the world, covering zoology, paleontology, geology, and mineralogy. The Museum für Naturkunde describes itself as an integrated research museum and is one of the most important research institutions worldwide. The museum's mission is, as you can read here on the website, to discover and describe life on Earth, and it defines itself as research museum and wants to engage with and influence the scientific and societal discourses about the future of our planet. The museum has over 700,000 visitors per year and a steadily increasing participation in educational and other events. It is in many perspectives and parts of it a typical natural history museum, a very big one, but a typical one. And it is in this context that we have been building up the Humanities department. What we do in the department is, first of all, research. Interdisciplinary research. We bring together scholars from the history of science, science and technology studies, the sociology of science and sustainability, cultural studies, museum studies, and the arts. The department focuses on the politics, histories, and cultures of nature through research and public engagements. The objective of our department is first and foremost excellent and cooperative research projects, but also to support critical self-reflection within the Natural History Museum in Berlin and biodiversity sciences in general, to develop theoretical and practical tools for analyzing the relations between nature, culture, and politics, and to advance novel cooperative knowledge practices. Our projects are third-party funded, and those third-party funded projects are the basis for our scientific output and our participation in many national and international networks and associations. At the moment, we have around 10 externally funded projects and 11 researchers, including myself, 6 student assistants, and numerous visiting scholars who are working in the department. And I'm really sorry, but I can't provide a picture because we haven't met since months. So you can just imagine our group of people. Sorry for that. To give you a comparison, the whole museum für Naturkunde has a total of 500 staff members, half of it, so around 250, being natural scientists. I'm really happy to have the next 40 minutes to share my experiences of setting up this department of in a natural history museum. And my talk is very much linked to the inspiring title of this panels that addresses the urgencies of the present. Because the question I raise, why do we need humanities and the arts in natural history museums, can only be answered if we consider those urgencies of the present. And that's how I would like to structure my talk. Firstly, I would like to talk about and think with you about colonialism and natural history. Secondly, I would like to talk about the urgencies posed by mass digitization processes. And thirdly, I would like to sketch out how we address those urgency in the department Humanities of Nature. Let me start with the colonial past and our historical responsibilities. I would like to briefly sketch out 3 important aspects of the colonial history of the Museum für Naturkunde. The museum had both a prominent standing and role in the national and international museum world from its beginning onwards, because for its longest time it was the capital's natural history museum and still is. It was opened by the German Emperor, Kaiser Wilhelm II, and had always very close contact to governmental institutions and actors. At the same time, the history of the Berlin Museum paradigmatically exemplifies the colonial past of museums, especially in the global north, a past that is characterized by extractivism and the translocation of objects, information and resources, by the objectification of nature, and by the racially legitimated exploitation of human beings. To make this point more clear, I would like to focus your attention on one of my favorite archival documents, which is an auction catalogue whose translated title reads as Catalogue of a Collection of Mammals and Birds from the Catherland, together with a collection of beetles, which are to be sold to the highest public bidder on March 14th, 1842. This auction catalogue was published in Berlin, and at this auction 50 mammals, 10 skulls, 257 birds and countless beetles were sold. And the catalogue is in itself a very impressive document of colonial appropriations. But I would like to draw your attention especially to this entry. Under the headline Schädel, which means skull, you see a couple of entries. Body parts from antelopes and zebras are listed. And if you take a closer look, you can see here in the lower section of the page that also skulls of humans were being auctioned away. The whole collection for this auction had been sent in by Ludwig Krebs, who was a collector commissioned by the Berlin Museum, and he collected those human remains in a cave at a river what is today South Africa. So what do we do with this kind of source? How does this auction catalogue signify the question of coloniality and of present urgencies? I would like to point out 4 aspects. First of all, colonial collecting has to be defined as collecting that took place under formal colonial rule and in contexts that preceded formal colonial rule. Colonial collecting and colonialism was intrinsically coupled with racism and the resulting shifting of moral boundaries in research, which, as in this case, led to the plundering of graves and to the dishonoring of the dead. What this auction catalogue so bluntly makes obvious is the objectification of human beings and the transformation of humans into collection numbers. Thirdly, collecting took place in pre- or transdisciplinary networks. The division between ethnological, anthropological, and natural history objects was not a division from the field, but something that was created in the metropolises, where these objects and also the dead persons were embedded in disciplinary fields of research and their respective institutions. This case was, as we all know, not an isolated case. Natural history was part of the extracting sciences, and natural history collectors brought everything they thought to be of interest back to their institutions. So it's not surprising that on this page, a few pages later, you see belongings like bracelets, a tobacco box, a coat that was made of antelope skin were also sold at the same auction. This brings me to my 4th point. Sorry, I forgot the slide. The MFN commodified colonial objects. The museum's rationality, especially under its first director, Martin Hinrich Lichtenstein, was based on the commodification of nature and in particular on the commodification of the colonized nature. A second decisive phase when the colonial...
Professor, excuse me, we had a problem with the translation and people are not listening in Portuguese anymore. Could you just stop for a second?
Sure, sorry.
No, it wasn't your problem.
Ina, we are just waiting for our translator come back. I think he had a problem with his internet.
Oh, okay.
And then we just we get back.
Okay, so just let me know where you dropped out.
Okay, I think 2 minutes, 1 minute ago. It was really quick.
He's back on.
Okay, let me check. Yeah. Was it here or before?
Before.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, okay. Good, I know where you've dropped out. So the that, of course, colonial collecting shifted the boundaries based on deeply embedded racism. So my third point was that colonial collecting was a transdisciplinary collecting. The division or the division between ethnological, anthropological, and natural history objects was not a division that was made in the field, but in the metropolises where these objects and also the human remains, the dead ones, were put into drawers in the disciplinary fields of research and then also in the respective research institutions. This plundering of graves was not an isolated case, as you all know, because natural history was part of the extracting sciences, and natural history collectors brought everything they thought to be of any interest back to their institutions. So it's not surprising that we find here, also as part of the catalogue, some other cultural objects like a coat, like a bracelet, like a head, like a tobacco box and stuff like that. So really cultural objects that also went through the natural history museums in Berlin and were commodified here. A second decisive phase in the colonial history of the museum took place near the end of the 19th century when as I have already mentioned, the museum was founded in 1810 as part of the newly established university. At that time, the holdings were still manageable. They all could be stuffed in this building. But the expansion of the collections in the coming decades was remarkable and resulted from the exploration and exploitation of the colonized areas, including Brazil, the Cape of Good Hope, South Africa, the Pacific Islands, and Australia. Especially in the period from 1884 to 1919, when the German Reich had colonies in Africa, the Pacific, in China, the Museum für Naturkunde played a prominent role in imperial politics. It initiated a large number of expeditions, one of which resulted in the fossils that are up to now still presented in the Dinosaur Hall since more than 8 decades. These fossils were translocated from the then German colony, German East Africa, to Berlin from 1909 onwards, and I will come back to this expedition later. The museum equipped colonial officials and military personnel in the colonies with basic knowledge in natural history collections, as well as with collecting instructions and collecting material. And the situation once again changed dramatically in 1889, even more in favor of the MFN. By a decision of the Germany's Federal Council, the museum was now to receive all objects from expeditions that were financed by the state, as well as all objects collected by colonial officials. And you can imagine that the mass of incoming and arriving material was overwhelming. What I show you here is something that is hard to read, but it's really, really interesting. It's a freight list, which something that everything knows who works in a zoology or in a museum at all. It's sent in by Friedrich Fülleborn, who was he was a doctor and a natural scientist who from 1896 onwards was medical officer in German East Africa, where he was also involved in the military suppression of local uprisings. And this list indicates that nearly 1 ton of objects, around 160 kilogram of ethnographic material, 396 kilogram of zoological material, and 332 botanical objects were sent in on one day, which was here, you see it here down below, on the 25th of June in 1900. What these sources demonstrate is that colonialism gave rise to what might be described as a colonial archive. Collections became places for the production of knowledge about the colonized territories and its people. They produced and reproduced colonial narratives and modes of presentation in exhibitions and publications. The role of natural history specimens, especially in the leading museums, was similar to other state archives. Instead of files, images, or other forms of documentation, specimens formed the infrastructure for advancing colonial structures of power and knowledge. Up to now, those colonial formations permeate our structures of thought, of knowledge, and discourse. These structures and epistemics are most prominently expressed in hierarchies of West, Rest, Old, New World, us, them, self, other, white, black, subject, object, you name it. So terms as colonial discourse or coloniality refer to ongoing epistemic, economic, and political forms of power that have been sustaining colonialism long after empires retrieved their forces from the colonies. To this day, the collections that were coming in during the colonies, for example, this one from Philibon, form a nationally and internationally significant basis for research and exhibitions. And more than ever, those colonial entanglements need to be analyzed and understood. To be credible, reflective, forward-looking, and globally relevant, natural history museums must examine and understand their colonial past. This brings me to the second urgency of the present, which is the urgency of mass digitization. The colonial past of major museum collections raises the urgent question of how we want to deal with these collections from colonial contexts. How can we acknowledge and engage this history of violent extractivism in our daily work? How can the history of colonial exploitation be transformed into a future of shared resources and multiple perspectives? How can we turn the unjust and illegitimate accumulation of collections into the basis of a global, polyphonic, and cooperative scholarship? These questions are more pressing than ever. For on the one hand, the massive loss of global biodiversity requires linking all available resources and infrastructures to understand biological catastrophes and to influence policy decisions on this basis. On the other hand, after decades of discussing the translocations of cultural objects or human remains, it is now in the past 2 years, I would say, that also natural history museums in their colonial past are increasingly becoming the focus of public and academic debates. And during these debates, it has once more become obvious that the majority of what is called heritage is inaccessibly stored in some few museums that are mostly located in the global north. Against this background, mass digitization of collections worldwide seems one important means to advance fast, equal, and fair access to collected items. Moreover, it is of course considered a major vehicle for negotiating the future of museums, their role in mobilizing participation in social change. In Germany, this technology-driven optimism has gained traction through a 3-road strategy on the documentation and digital publication of collections from colonial context. This strategy was published in October 2020 and is focusing on giving access to colonial objects in a central database, digitizing colonial objects, and thirdly, to develop standards on how we would like to digitize and publish our colonial past in cooperation with countries and societies of origin. These developments are so interesting because they make clear that digitization is now something that is really on a governmental and national level of discussion And that is, of course, it's also an imperative for enacting social and political responsibility. And it is indeed so appealing to think that if we digitize our collections, our problems might be solved, and that those digital technologies will finally realize global accessibilities and the ending of injustices. However, the main underlying assumptions of digitization, like transparency, access, participation, standardization, are rarely questioned. And I mean, those processes are funded with quite a lot of national and international governmental funds. But particularly when it comes to the context of objects from colonial context, we need to think of what we want to do with this kind of digitization processes. Because the underlying idea remains that political problems could be solved by technical solutions. And this idea should make us pause and ask critical questions on the ways in which technology and developments in data practices are already part of existing social and political problems. Like many museums worldwide, the Museum für Naturkunde is now boosted by generous financial support from state and federal governments, and has the unique opportunity to digitally catalog and present its 30 million objects and to make them worldwide open, accessible. So this enormous task is more than challenging, apart from the fundamental problem of whether digitization can be equated with accessibility. Other challenges arise when we look at objects from colonial contexts. As said before, the Museum für Naturkunde holds 30 million objects. Out of those million of objects, how do we identify those of colonial contexts and how do we tag them? How can we enable symmetrical descriptions in the databases that take into account and bring together different bodies of knowledge? How should a digitization process be designed that allows for different epistemologies and perspectives right from the start? And is it enough or a good first step to have the inventories online as demanded in the public debate? What must entries in databases look like to allow communities in the countries of origin to search for objects and use the data? And how do we present or digitize sensitive objects? These and many more questions are part of our work at the Humanities of Nature department and brings me to my third chapter. So, I mean, all of us are aware of the huge amount of problems societies are globally confronted with, and also natural history museums are confronted with. We could talk about pandemics, climate change, loss of biodiversity, and I've just picked out two of those problems and intertwined urgencies, which is the increasing public and institutional awareness of the link between colonialism and natural history on the one hand, and on the other hand, I talked about the opportunities and constraints that are presented by current efforts to digitize collections. In the following, I would like to describe how we reflect on these challenges and try to integrate them in our work in the Naturkunde Museum Berlin, using some of our ongoing projects as an example. And before that, I would like to say that, of course, what we do is to cooperate. We work in a worldwide network of institutions and communities. And let me say again how happy I am to be here. And I am looking forward to your questions and comments. And if you want to engage further with our work and our department, let me know. And let's exchange email addresses. So I would like to start with our project Dinosaurs in Berlin, which was running for 3 years, long before German museums actually acknowledged the contested past of natural history museums. And we started to research the most popular and well-known exhibit of the Museum für Naturkunde, which is the skeleton of Brachiosaurus brancai, whose mounting you see here on the website. The bones of this fascinating, wonderful specimens were excavated together with 225 tons of other fossils from 1909 onwards at Tendaguru Hill, which is a little hill in the hinterland of German East, what is today Tanzania, and what was at that time the former colony German East Africa. The finds bear eloquent witness to the Jurassic period and remain one of the world's most important paleontological specimens. The expedition was led by 2 paleontologists from the German Museum für Naturkunde. However, as in many other expeditions, its success was largely due to the local population, more than 500 workers who, as workers in all kinds of practices, cooks, hunters, excavators, preparators, and above all porters, made this major logistical undertaking possible. Our project tried to deeply understand and reconstruct this colonial past and by that to change the narrative of our museum. Building on what became clear is that the museum, building on the fossils from Tendaguru, hoped to strengthen its scientific standing and establish itself as a key player in the international competition for spectacular discoveries. Scientific interests were deeply intertwined with colonial political ambitions. In 1910, the first enormous bones from Brachiosaurus brancai were put on display, and it was soon clear that those fossils would indeed fulfill the museum's expectations. The fossils were presented as national objects found in our German soil in Africa. That was the quote. And narratives such as these, which promoted a national understanding of science, were not limited to the Tendaguru expedition. It's a very common feature of scientific rhetorics at that time. On the eve of First World War, such rhetoric emphasized the role of science in the competition between nations and legitimized colonial violence. The project also investigated the legal and political circumstances by which the museum would claim ownership of those fossils, because it was not an easy process. In fact, it was a very intricate and lengthy political and legal discussion behind the scenes that was needed to develop a procedure in which the area around the Tendaguru Hill and all fossils were declared the ownership of the MFN. And what you see here on the screen is a document that declared that the area was deserted. There lived nobody, as you can see here, and nobody claimed ownership. This document had to be confirmed by local chiefs, and on this basis the transfer of the entire area and all finds into the possession of German Empire was declared. As you can imagine, the property interests, the culture of the local population was neither consulted nor taken into account. Last year, new panels were installed in the Dinosaur Hall, which describe in much detail what our project find out. And they also commemorate the contribution made by local workers. Some of these workers are known by name, and you see their pictures here. And it's a couple of years ago since researchers at the Museum für Naturkunde also started to name newly described species after those local workers. For example, Australodocus bohetii, a dinosaur specimen species that is described after Boheti bin Amrani, which was the most important preparator and I would say researcher in Tendaguru. We published our results in German in 2018 and in a Kiswahili edition this year, and because we decided that we do want the book to be published and accessible in a language that is not a colonial language, a language that is spoken in the areas around the excavation site in in Tanzania and also the neighboring countries. So the Tendaguru, and part of this book is also our research together with a team of Tanzanian scholars at Tendaguru Hill, where we've tried to get a clue about the memories of the excavation and also the meaning of the fossils and local traditional knowledge. So to close this chapter, the Tendaguru fossils are an outstanding testament of life on Earth 150 million years ago. But they are also an outstanding testament of the colonial past of our museums. The discussions about the circumstances of their discovery have led to a reappraisal of the colonial contexts. And thanks to our department's work, the museum is actively engaging with its complex history together with Tanzanian partners for a common future. A second project that is currently underway looks into the colonial past of one of the museum's most important collection, the colonial provenance of the mammal collection. This collection is interesting for many reasons, and I would like to name just two. First of all, it was managed by the same head, Paul Machi, from 1890 to 1926. Secondly, the mammal collection exemplifies in a striking way how the museum benefited from the colonial expansion of the German Reich. In 1895, when Machi took over the leadership or the management of the collection comprised of 8,000 specimens. At his death in 1926, the collection had grown to 200,000 specimens. So from 8,000 to 200,000. These numbers might be not totally correct, as it always is with numbers in natural history collections, but what they do is to make obvious that the collection's reputation as one of the world's best mammal collection was mainly built on colonial material. The central driving force behind this development was, beside the political developments, Machi himself, who strategically not only published about the colonies, but also tried to get the hunters and the collectors in the colonies to not only hunt as much as they could, but also to send everything into the museum. So what the outcome of this instrument, as he wrote about in, for example, in his The Mammals of German East Africa, in the preface, he made it very clear. He wrote, "The present work is intended as instrument for the scientific identification of mammals living in German East Africa. It is primarily for those who, as hunters and collectors, are engaged in zoological research of our protected areas," so of our colonies, this means. And by those strategies of Machi, the museum became a hub between the colonies, between market and museums. Machi organized the duplicate catalogs, he organized rifles, preparation equipment, hunting permits, and was in a regular correspondence with those who supplied the objects for his collections. And as such, the mammal collection developed into an outstanding example of how politics, science, and big game hunting met in their respective interests. Let me fastly come to our Art Nature project, because we did not only research or do not only research the political past of the museum, we also implemented a artistic program, which was called Art Nature in the museum, because our aim was to have multiple perspectives on the museum and its past, and not only research outputs. And of course, we wanted to fascinate audiences in museums, in museum work, and in the sciences we do in museums. So we commissioned international artists to explore the museum by themselves and create a new piece of art. And one example for an artistic approach to historical collections is extremely interesting. It's by the Peruvian artist Fernando Bryce, who has a strong interest in history. And Bryce works with the method of transferring historical documents and texts into ink drawings. And he did that also in his work for the museum. One of his cycle paintings, which you see here, is called In the Act, Auf frischer Tat, and it examines the representations of natural history in the early 20th century media. As source material, Bryce used newspaper articles, travel reports, portraits of researchers, and popular science journals that he researched in the museum archives and libraries. By selecting those media and placing them in relation to one another, Bryce created a whole new context of meaning and allows the political and cultural dimension of natural history research to become really visible. This painting was especially interesting for us, working with exactly the same sources as historians of science. The picture was shown in the permanent exhibitions, and we established special tours and public talks between artists, collection managers, and museum researchers. In a very open atmosphere, the museum staff, visitors, and art-interested people were able to engage in a stimulating dialogue. The experience showed us the importance of outreach and communication for mutual learning processes between art and science. We documented our findings and the interventions in a series in 2 books, and they are also part of and accessible via the MFN websites. The last project I would like to comment on is the guidelines for dealing with natural history collections from colonial contexts. Our research findings, but also those artistic collaborations, made us really think about how we in general would like to deal with our conflicted and contested past. How do we want to work with collections from colonial contexts? How can we make colonial heritage visible? How can we establish cooperations that do not fall in the trap of colonial structures? How do we want to publish colonial material? How do we need to digitize those objects, and so on and so forth? In May 2020, we started the projects on guidelines on dealing with natural history collections from colonial contexts, and we did so even though in the same time a guideline by the German Museum Association was published on the care of collections from colonial contexts. But both in this guideline as well as in the public debate in Germany, it's interesting to observe that natural history is not mentioned at all, either that, or it's not discussed in its specificities. And so we think it's very important to really think about the political, legal, and ethical aspects of natural history collections and their specificities. What we did is to engage quite a lot of discussions within the museum, but also with communities and scholars in the international museum world. And beyond publications, our main output is a website, which you find on the website of the MFN, which critically reflects its historical responsibility of the MFN. And this doesn't seem like something relevant at first, but in fact for us it was really a milestone in making the museum acknowledge and recognize its historical responsibility, and by that to gradually change the museum's and the staff's identity. Identity brings me to the field of digitization again, and to the research field of data natures that Tahani Nadim, my colleague has built up. And it's a very interesting field of research because when you think of what kind of technologies are important and relevant, you have to think about culture, as a recently published article makes clear. It asks, how does a cultural institution transform into a digital knowledge infrastructure or resource? And the answer they give is that digital competence is 10% technology and 90% of institutional culture. And for us, this is so interesting and very affirming that the best techniques and database systems are of no use if they are not embedded in a fundamental transformation of institutions. Our department is part of this process because we provide expertise and space for reflection. The digitization, as I said, generates many promises, and by that also new challenges. And one central challenge is the social relevance of digitization. Digitizing natural history collections has always to be more than a digital procedure of turning physical specimens into data points. It really has to democratize natural history collections, and it needs to serve society, us, and communities in ways that we just do not know yet. So what we do in this research field of data natures is a series of projects in which we examine the datafication of nature and its consequences for science, publics, and politics. And we do collaborative and cooperative research projects that strengthen the dialogue between humanities and information and data sciences. To reflect and analyze those processes is especially needed if we look into the digitization of colonial contexts. So this brings me to my final remark. If museums are to become those democratizing, inclusive, and polyphonic spaces for critical dialogue, as a new definition proposed by ICOM members, then they need departments for the humanities. And that's not only the case because we, the humanities, provide expertise to research the provenance of objects or to research different aspects of the sciences that were part of the objects we exhibit. It is above all because we need institutions that are reflective and trustworthy. And to achieve this, we must continually review and expand our narrative, include multiple and new voices and perspectives, and enter into collaborations with non-academic partners. We need to think theoretically innovative and transgressively to open museums and their collections to collectively shared, relevant interpretation. Nature has always been more than pure nature. It has always been a nature that has been prepared, possessed, transported, dreamed of, plundered, explored, and exhibited. And museums have never been simply spaces of research and education. They have always been spaces of political relations, of money, of competition, of social inclusions and exclusions. To reflect ourselves in this complex webs of historical references and future possibilities requires interdisciplinary spaces of research, engagement, and change. Thank you. Sorry.
Muito obrigada, Ina, pela sua excelente contribuição. Você estava na dúvida se a sua fala iria de encontro ao foco, né, que a gente pretendia trazer para essa sua contribuição. Eu acho que ela atingiu em cheio. Tá? Eu acho muito importante que você tenha trazido essas questões que parecem estar circunscritas, né, ao âmbito das humanidades, se utilizando de exemplos da história natural, trabalhando com um acervo, né, para além da questão dos vestígios humanos que estão depositados em museus tradicionais de história natural. Você trouxe exemplos que lidam com espécimens de história natural, e isso é muito importante que a gente tenha em mente. É muito interessante a gente verificar como que um museu emblemático como o Museu de História Natural de Berlim, né, tem abordado essas questões, a seriedade com que eu acho que talvez seja até uma política da própria Alemanha, uma política cultural da Alemanha, e aí tem um pouco da minha dúvida. Antes de passar até para as perguntas do público, eu queria só verificar com você, porque você menciona a criação do Departamento de Humanidades da Natureza dentro do museu, acho que em 2012, e eu queria saber, e você depois menciona 11 pesquisadores associados a esse departamento, eu entendi correta, são 11 pesquisadores só desse departamento, e 30 milhões de exemplares. Por que eu só queria colocar umas questões que eu acho interessante em contexto? Porque o Museu de Zoologia da Universidade de São Paulo, que tem um foco exclusivo em coleções zoológicas, ele reúne cerca de 11 milhões de exemplares. A nossa coleção, ao contrário da coleção de Berlim, ela não é tão geograficamente abrangente. A gente tem um foco, né, em animais, na fauna, principalmente brasileira, neotropical, com alguns exemplares globais, né, obviamente, que por meio de permuta. E nós temos 13 docentes, 13 pesquisadores, né, da área de biodiversidade, e apenas eu atuando nessa interface. Então, isso é uma coisa interessante, né? Você fala de 30 milhões de exemplares, você fala de um staff de 500 pessoas, 200 dedicadas para a história natural. Eu acho que isso dá um contexto dessa situação, e a própria inauguração do departamento em 2012 me faz te questionar, antes de passar para o público, se isso foi uma política nacional da Alemanha para lidar com as questões coloniais, que esse é um problema que, por exemplo, nós aqui não temos. Como eu mencionei na nossa conversa antes para você, o desafio dos museus de história natural no Brasil, ele está principalmente voltado, tem coisas em comum, como digitalização, essas urgências do presente, mas uma urgência do presente no Brasil é lidar com a megadiversidade, que eu acho que é bem diferente da situação que a Alemanha enfrenta. Mas, então fica essa pergunta só para a gente esclarecer. Como se deu essa vontade de criar este departamento dentro desse Museu Tradicional de História Natural?
Thank you. Yes, and also thank you for the numbers. 11 million objects and 30 scholars in your case, and 30 million objects and 500 researchers and technicians in the case of the German Museum. And we are still have the feeling that we are underfunded, you know, that we are not enough. That's such a good, you know, to really see what we are talking about. And I have to say, I'm also really, of course, I'm aware of the loss you faced with the museum in Rio. and the fire that destroyed so many millions of objects, and such a wonderful and global collection. So the idea to build up the department was part of the inauguration of Johannes Vogel as our Director General. He's a botanist, geneticist who came from London, from the British Museum, the Natural History Museum in London, where he was curator for the botanical collections. And from his very broad interest in culture and politics, he came with the idea of, having a humanities department as part of the Natural History Museum and as part of the transformation. And he was also, of course, thinking about third-party funding, because he knew he needs the museum to grow, and he knew that humanities scholars are good in writing proposals and to get the influx of money. So what we did in the beginning is writing proposals to really get the whole thing started. And so it was not on colonial things in the beginning. Our first project was called The Nature of Things. I could get the book and show it to you, but I don't have to, because you can just type it and look it up. It's The Nature of Things. So that was the first project. We published 99 stories about from all collection parts about fascinating objects. And what we wanted to do is to get to know the museum, our colleagues, and to spark the sense that natural history is such an interesting thing to do. I can send you a copy, Isabel, if you want, or if this would be of any help for your library and yourself. So this was our first project, and then I wrote the next proposal, and my work in my office was always passing the dinosaurs, and I knew, of course, that they were colonial objects, but it was not part of the exhibition. So I thought, this object is really standing in the middle of the museum. The whole dinosaur hall is as if the museum was built around the dinosaur, which is not the case, because it was the dinosaurs came later. But it's really something which is part of the museum's identity. We are proud to have those items, and I thought we really need to look into this history. And we wanted to, initially I had the idea to compare it with the head of Nefertiti. I don't know if you're aware of this wonderful Egyptian head, which is also part of the museum world in Germany. It's 1 kilometer far from the dinosaur, and it was excavated from the soil in a colony in the same time. And I had loved to compare those two items, but the federal museums didn't want me to talk about dinosaurs and Nefertiti in the same time, so I just focused on the dinosaur. And this really was something that that sparked reflection and also fears. So many fears came up. And I mean, Isabel, you said, if I understood you right, you don't have the problem of colonialism, but of course it's for example, for preparing my talk, I was going through the files again and looked for Brazilian objects, and of course, I mean, it's so interesting. They are just listed, and yes, I would love to start a discussion with you about those objects, and maybe also a project, because it's so interesting to have Brazilian animals in drawers in the Berlin Museum, and of course in other museums as well, and to think about what happened before they could come, and how they were collected, and what political conditions had to be in place to make European researchers collect those items.
Na verdade, assim, o que eu quis dizer é que eu imagino que isso hoje não seja nós temos problemas coloniais, mas nós temos o outro lado da questão colonial, inclusive, se a gente for pensar na pesquisa em biodiversidade, muitas vezes as coleções importantes estão depositadas nos grandes museus, e os nossos alunos, pesquisadores, dependem destas parcerias para terem acesso a materiais que foram extraídos do nosso território, e nem sempre isso foi uma história simples e suave, né? Então, eu acho que, nesse aspecto, o colonialismo ele está presente, sem dúvida, nos nossos museus, mas quando eu penso na urgência do presente, assim, eu penso que outros temas, como da megadiversidade e a necessidade de lidar com esse conhecimento básico da biodiversidade, que é uma questão que os grandes museus europeus hoje talvez não estejam lidando com isso, com a pressão que nós temos, né, e os poucos recursos. Quando eu falei em 13 pesquisadores, eu quis dizer docentes responsáveis por coleções. Na verdade, nós temos um staff de cerca de 70 pessoas, tá? Nas diversas áreas do museu, administrativa, exposições e tudo mais, né? Então, é um staff pequeno, e a parte da pesquisa, que depende imensamente dos projetos feitos pelos professores, são 13 professores hoje alocados à frente dessas coleções, né? Mas, de fato, eu acho que a gente tem coisas interessantíssimas para pensar, até nessa questão do ecossistema dos museus de história natural e desses diferentes nichos que nós precisamos ocupar com propriedade, ainda que num contexto global de urgências como digitalização e acesso aos dados das coleções. Eu acho que isso é universal, né? Esse é um desafio universal, entre outros, né? Mas nós temos peculiaridades, e às vezes trabalharmos essas peculiaridades num contexto de reciprocidades pode ser algo realmente muito enriquecedor. Eu tenho outras perguntas, mas eu vou passar para o público, e se eu tiver tempo, eu coloco novamente, tá? Muito obrigada, Ina.
Professora Isabel, professora Ina, então eu vou trazer algumas perguntas que estão aqui no Question and Answer. Na verdade, a primeira não é uma pergunta, é uma congratulação da coordenadora do programa de museologia, a professora Maria Cristina Oliveira Bruno, que agradece, enfim, a sua contribuição e excelente apresentação no evento. E agora vamos lá para a pergunta. A primeira é do Kleberson Moura, ele é do Museu de Arqueologia e Etnologia da USP e da Faculdade de Educação da mesma universidade, e ele diz parabéns e obrigado pela conferência. E ele pergunta, né, aí ele colocou, né, se isso fugir muito do seu escopo de trabalho, a professora Ina não tem problema, mas ele tem uma curiosidade, né, se você pudesse comentar um pouco sobre quais as técnicas e métodos de digitalização vocês estão usando e como estão dando acesso aos dados em termos de licenças, né, então as questões de Creative Commons, essas questões mais operacionais da digitalização de acervos e disponibilização de acervos. Essa seria a primeira.
Well, that's I would wish that we could zoom you into the Berlin Museum, because of course you need to talk to the people standing at those huge, enormous machines. We just call them the beast. Because they are in fact enormous. I showed you in my slides one of the exhibition rooms where we have the exhibition Digitize on show, and it's actually a live event of digitizing specimens in a automated way. So what the museum does with this enormous amount of money is to try to, during the next 10 years, to build up kind of factories of digitizing objects to be fast and steady. And I can't give you all the technical details, but I would be most happy to connect you with my colleague Frederick Berger, for example, who is in charge of the whole digitization process. And what we want to do is to put those objects on the data portal of the museum, and they shall all be online. And on the, I'm not sure about the licenses they are discussing. What we do from the Humanities department is to, right now we are writing an article about how the idea of digitizing for all is based on the assumption that it's a technical process. You know, there's a procedure. You have a digitization demand, then you go researching in the collection. If you have a digitized object, then you digitize it, check for information, make the data, metadatas, and so on and so forth. And we are going, or what we try to do in this article is to really reflect on all the decisions we do in this whole process, where we decide to include people or exclude them, where we decide because technology drives us to decide what we do, and to, you know, to really open up a space for reflection. And if you are interested in this kind of work, I would be happy to send you the first draft of the article. I don't know if I answered your question.
Obrigada. Agora vamos para a segunda, que é da professora Maria Margarete Lopes. Ela diz: excelente palestra, parabéns. Gostaria que você comentasse um pouco mais sobre o projeto de digitalização das coleções, então mais ou menos no mesmo sentido, envolvendo os processos culturais e políticos. E, se possível, comentar as eventuais dificuldades da implantação do Departamento de Humanidades com as áreas de ciências naturais.
So if I understood the question right, you would like to get a better idea of how we work in the museum. Okay, so as I said, we are 11 opposed or together with 250 natural scientists, and if everything goes smoothly, it's a wonderful cooperation. Because the longer we are part of the museum, the more people are interested and fascinated on what we do, and that's, Isabel, you can affirm that. People working in zoology museums are historians themselves because they need to know their collections. So what we do is not that far away from what they did, just that we are more critical and we do have different narratives after we conducted research. And sometimes that, of course, causes conflict. For example, the dinosaur, when we started to ask critical questions about the whole excavation, about how they exploited the workers, everything, the paleontologists really got angry. They didn't want us to talk about their heritage in this way, and they were afraid of us. That of the result of our work would be that we had to restitute the object, or that our forefathers would be torn down or something like that. And the longer we are there, the more trust they have that, of course, what we do is research, and that this is an important aspect of the work. So, for me, the most interesting thing is to really be aware that we are living in two cultures. We are living in a divide between the humanities and the natural scientists. And I think if we want to address the global challenges that you, Isabel, just mentioned again, those awful catastrophes which we can really see, we need to combine our expertise and to try to really find solutions. And so the interesting thing is to be specific in what we do and to explain it in a way that everyone understands it and feels not threatened. That's something you don't have to do when you are with your peer group. You say specific words and everyone knows what you mean. And if you are in interdisciplinary contexts, you have to spell out every single thing. And that makes everyone learning, I guess.
Obrigada. Então, a próxima pergunta é da Rebeca Bombonato. Ela também é do Museu de Arqueologia e Etnologia da USP. E ela gostaria de saber se as pesquisas feitas no seu departamento possuem alguma troca com pesquisas feitas por outras instituições que também fazem parte da Leibniz Association, ou se existem planos para que essas pesquisas se tornem parte de um grande tópico de pesquisa entre esses museus.
So I repeat the question again because it was the translation and your voice, Paula, somehow intermingled. So what you want to know is, Rebecca, is if we work just in the Leibniz Association or also in other associations worldwide.
Isso mesmo, se há parcerias em relação a esse projeto de pesquisa com outras instituições e que fazem parte da Leibniz Association, né? Ou se existem planos para que isso se torne uma pesquisa entre vários museus, outros tipos de associação. Então, se o projeto se expandiria em parcerias. É um pouco esse sentido a pergunta.
Yes, I have those plans. So the Leibniz Association is an association of research institutes and museums in Germany, and the Museum für Naturkunde is part of it. And there are also all the huge national museums of Germany are part of this Leibniz Association. So by this association, we are already cooperation partners from many other German museums, and we had already cooperations going. So this is a very convenient association to dive and drive under. But we are seeking or searching for all kinds of cooperations, also with non-university institutions like in Germany there's the Max Planck Society, which is a famous and old academic institution. But also what we try also to integrate non-academic actors in our work. For example, there's a huge community of activists who want to make visible the colonial past in German streets, for example, and monuments and so on and so forth. And we would love to, and we do already work together with those non-academic researchers. So we are always trying to find partners to have the most inspiring and most interesting combination of interests.
Paula, eu acho que a gente não tem perguntas. Eu posso fazer uma pergunta, então, para...
Sim, por favor.
Ina, você mencionou que o diretor responsável pela implantação do Departamento de Humanidades da Natureza no Museu de Berlim, ele veio de Londres, né, do Museu de História Natural ou do Museu de História Natural, provavelmente, né? E eu ia te perguntar uma coisa, eu lembro que em Londres eles fizeram uma experiência análoga com a criação de um departamento de humanidades dentro do Museu de Londres, mas que eu não sei se foi bem sucedida. Você sabe dizer como anda exatamente pelo desafio que eles tinham de se manter por meio de projetos, né? Em que eles tentavam fazer projetos o tempo todo, que era uma coisa assim, com instituições culturais de Londres, principalmente, eu acho que outros museus de arte e tudo mais, que tinha uma coisa muito assim. Eu não sei como é que foi essa experiência em Londres, você tem notícias?
Yes, I just posted you the head of the Museum für Naturkunde, which is, I won't comment on it. So this is Herr Vogel, and as we started, we visited the Arts and Humanities Department in London because it was so interesting what they did. but what was interesting to see is that it was headed by a biologist. So they had built up a department, but not the expertise on top. And as far as I'm informed, it's not a very thriving institutions anymore. But I'm not sure if I'm on the Isabel, maybe you know more about the recent developments in London. But right now, it's not very vibrant institution anymore. They made really interesting things. For example, what they did in the beginning is to interview custodians in their collections, because what is so interesting in museums is that many knowledge is handed over from one person to the next without any paperwork in between you. So it's all about implicit knowledge, which is in the heads but not written down anywhere. So they tried to get to this knowledge which is in the heads of the people, and interviewed them and collected those interviews and archived them to really have a resource for further research and for the really the past of the institution. And that was something I really found absolutely appealing and interesting.
Thank you, Ina. Mais perguntas temos? Algum comentário, alguma coisa?
Por hora, não. Mas a gente ainda tem um tempinho, então, se vocês quiserem, podem mandar no question answer que a gente...
Eu vou aproveitar, então, e perguntar para a Ina se ela tem notícias de experiências análogas em outros museus, outros grandes museus de história natural, né? Porque eu fico pensando, assim, do ponto de vista da gente, na dificuldade de contratação de pessoal, esse comprometimento em você formar uma nova equipe, né? Com uma expertise tão distinta ali da tradicional da instituição, né? Então, isso é um comprometimento de longo prazo, né, e tudo mais. Então, eu queria saber se vocês, como você tem se articulado, né, inclusive organizou aquele workshop que aconteceria lá no encontro compartilhado do Spinach e do Hipponatrist, né? Então, você sabe de experiências análogas, bem-sucedidas, assim, em museus de história natural, lidando com essa questão da história natural, humanidades da natureza?
We are in close contact with Kew and British museums because what they want to do is to have a plant humanities department or research center built up, and it's really interesting that because they have, of course, the same interests, and so what we are is a kind of model for other museums. And no, I mean, what I encounter is that people ask me, how does it come that you have this kind of research institution and we don't? And can you give me any hints and tips, and how should I proceed to get a kind of arts and humanities center? And the answer I have to give is just that you need someone who has the vision of integration, which Johannes Vogel brought with him from London, and maybe also the initiative of persons who really knock on the door of natural history museums and start to work on their past.
Acho que é isso, né, Paula? Muito obrigada a todos. Um agradecimento super especial para a Ina, né? Eu espero que essa seja a primeira oportunidade de você contribuir, né, com essa experiência aqui, inclusive no nosso programa de pós-graduação aqui da Universidade de São Paulo, em Museologia, né? Então, fica o convite para futuras interações, vamos nos manter em contato, muito obrigada, e eu alerto a todos para a conferência que nós teremos na parte da tarde, que vai justamente abordar essa questão da forte digitalização que os museus de história natural estão enfrentando, o que está ensejando, né, o que o professor Friedbacher vai trazer, essa proposta da criação de um museu global de metadados, né, onde a gente tem acesso aos metadados dessas coleções e o potencial que isso representa para pesquisa, para curadoria de dados e também para difusão do conhecimento, né? Então, eu agradeço a todos que estão aqui neste painel, que me auxiliaram, né, nos bastidores dessa conferência, especialmente a doutora Ina Heumann, e desejo a todos uma boa tarde, e lembrem, estaremos de volta às 2h30 com essa conferência também interessante em torno dos museus de história natural. Obrigada.
Thank you so much, Isabel. Have a nice evening, or no, day. You have a day.
Nice evening for you.
And write me an email if you need anything more to know. Goodbye.
Bye, thank you.
Thank you.